Hello, my name is Kay Aubrey-Chimene, and I am the director of Photonic Therapy Institute, your host for this Independence from Pain. I'm going to say that again. Hello, my name is Kay Aubrey-Chimene, and I am the director of Photonic Therapy Institute, your host for this Independence from Pain Summit. My guest this session is Ronnie Spressor. Ronnie was introduced to photonic acupuncture after being kicked in the chest by a horse. Her immediate recovery made her a believer in the power of red light, and she decided to get trained to help others. Soon, Ronnie began working closely with Dr. Brian McLaren. Dr. McLaren's pioneering research in the late 1980s led to the development of an advanced form of acupuncture using light rather than needles to stimulate acupuncture points. Today, many of us call this photopuncture. This led to the development of the first red LED torch for assisting a range of ailments in people and animals. Ronnie has now been working with various aspects of photonic acupuncture for over 20 years. Her clients range from Olympic level athletes to barn cats and alpaca. Today, she's here to tell us about an amazing recovery from severe stroke by one of her very first clients. Welcome, Ronnie.
Thanks, Kay. Thanks for having me on.
So you got kicked in the chest by a horse. Tell us a little bit about that whole experience.
Okay, it was my own horse, actually.
Oh, no.
I took her up to a clinic for training and to train her and myself. And I was walking her down the wall and she just turned and kicked me right in the chest. No warning, no anything. And the clinic I was in, the instructors actually carried torches with them back then. And so one of them just took me aside and they used the torch on me with emergency points and cardiac arrest points. And I did go to the hospital just to make sure there was nothing wrong with my heart. I was in my 30s.
So this was a bad enough kick that you were knocked down, you were seriously hit.
Yes, she buckled me over. Okay. And the instructor heard it across the arena.
Wow.
And she had her back to me, a matter of fact, and she said, somebody just got kicked. And yes, so went and had it checked out. The doctor owns horses, and he said, you are going to have one huge bruise, invest in a leave. I said, okay. And I went home, and the next day had no pain and no bruising.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And you attributed that, of course, to the light therapy you got right after the kick.
Absolutely. And what was interesting was right after it happened, I could feel, and after they stimulated the acupuncture points, I could feel my chest tingling. And I thought that was really interesting to feel what was going on in my body. And yes.
So you never got the big bruise, you never got any of that issue, you were fine?
Nothing.
So how did you then, what then was your next step? How did you start learning more about what to do?
I called and purchased the torch right then. I mean, I was like, this was crazy. So the next day I purchased my torch through the instructors, and unfortunately they don't assist you. So I got my torch, and for 2 years it sat in a box.
Uh-oh.
I never took it out. Then I heard about Dr. Brian McLaren. He was going to be up in Kansas City, which is near where I live. And I went to one of his clinics.
And so Dr. McLaren was teaching clinics. What was this, a clinic for humans, for working on horses? What kind of clinic was it?
It was both humans and horses. And so I drove up. I had a 3-month-old baby at the time, and I had to leave her at home, who had reflux, and I was having a sciatic problem. And so I drove up to Kansas City, and the people who hosted the seminar actually hosted me in their home for 2 days.
Wow.
And it was great. I learned so much. I am a hands-on person. So reading the book and looking through things was not helping me. So when I went up to this clinic, oh my gosh, it was just amazing because the light bulb just went off for me. It was the biggest aha moment for me. I was able to speak to Dr. McLaren personally because it was just a small group, and he was able to tell me how to stimulate the points for my daughter's reflux. And my daughter would drink a bottle and throw a bottle up. Oh. And she was, they looked for pyloric stenosis and nothing, but she had severe reflux. And I had such severe sciatic problem that I could barely walk by the time I got up there. And so he worked on me and then told me how to work on my daughter and showed me where to work on myself. And I went home, and in 1 month, my daughter stopped throwing up and had no more reflux. And I was able to put her back on regular formula, and my sciatic pain went away.
And describe the tool you were using.
Back then it was a torch it was about, I'd say 8 or 10 inches long. It was black with chrome. We would just twist it to turn it on. It had 5 diodes in the end, kind of a cone shape on the end. And I would just
red light,
LED monochromatic light.
Nice.
Completely safe.
And after you had this, how did you end up start working with Dr. McLaren more?
He saw that I was like, the body just amazed me. And it does. The body just amazes me because when you stimulate it properly, wow, what it can do for us. I mean, it can heal. It's just amazing. And sure. So he saw my interest, and him being from Australia, he was wanting somebody to really head things in the United States. So I just kept on, I would call him and call him and call him. And at the time he was in the United States. And at some point, a couple years after we met, he had to go back to Australia. And we just communicated by telephone.
So you told me a little bit about one of your very first clients that you worked with who had stroke. Yes. How did you end up working with a stroke victim? That's a pretty brave thing to do with your first clients. And tell us about what happened.
Oh man, it was exciting. It was my neighbors, we lived out on a farm, and my neighbors knew that I did light therapy because I was always out working with my own horses to teach myself and to learn more. And what I would do is I would transpose the horse points to the human and the human points to the horse. So it helped me to learn where the points were. And so they came over and they said their brother had just had a massive stroke and was told he'd be a vegetable for the rest of his life. What do you think? Can you use this light on him? And I said, it doesn't hurt. There's no adverse effects, and it'll help something. And that's how new I was. I couldn't tell him anything, but I was not afraid to use it. Because one time, I'll go back just a little bit. One time, we lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and we had some horses other than my own on our property. And I woke up in the middle of the night and saw one of the horses rolling. And I looked in the ground and I could see they'd been rolling for a long time. So I grabbed my torch and I grabbed my, I had a chart for colic points, and I ran out and got this horse and I stimulated the colic points and was able, and in the meantime, had to wait till morning to call the vet. By the time I was able to call the vet, the horse was fine. Come to find out, our tank heater was shocking the horses, so they weren't drinking.
Oh no.
So we rectified that. But so I knew that I could get close by looking at the books. And so they drove me an hour and a half to the rehab center he was in, and twice a week. And so the first time I went, and I was just, wow. When I walked in, I thought to myself, you have a big job ahead of you. And so I told the family that I would be showing them how to do this. So I needed them there to watch and assist. I use 2 torches always. I did back then as well. And I sat and look in my...
Tell us what state he was in before we go forward. What did you find? What was going on with him when you got there?
He had a trach and a feeding tube. He was completely paralyzed on his right side. He could not speak. He could make eye contact, but there was no communication whatsoever. He was told he would be a vegetable for the rest of his life.
Oh, okay, sorry. I just didn't know.
No, that's okay. That's okay, because I think that's important to know going forward, because things happened so fast. Even I was just like, oh my gosh, wow. And that's what really made me jump into this first.
Sure.
So they drove me down and we went into his room and we just shut the door so that when his door was shut, nobody really would come in. And so we had a little privacy. And I stimulated, in my book back then, there are points for stroke. And I use the, excuse me, the emergency points. And what you call health and balance points, Dr. McLaren called standard points.
Right.
Same thing. You stimulate those points every time you stimulate something else. Now, back when I started, Dr. McLaren said, you stimulate standard points plus, plus, plus. So okay. We didn't spread them out. I stimulated everything that day. And it worked. You know, so that was on a Monday. And I went back on Thursday. And we were running a little late, and his therapist came running out. She said, we've been waiting for you all day. And I looked at her and she said, you are not going to believe what this gentleman is doing. And I was like, what? She said, he could lift his right leg from the hip. He could flex his toes, and he had feeling from his toes to his knees.
And that was the side he was paralyzed on?
Yes.
Oh my word. And that was, had he had sessions by the family in between, or was that just the one session with you?
One session with me.
Wow. One
session with me. Each time I went back, there was exponential things that had happened. At one point, he started talking. And the doctors didn't want to do a swallow test because they knew, because he had a trach, that he would not be able to swallow. And I kept encouraging the family. I said, you need to really push for this swallow test because he's talking and shouldn't be able to talk with a trach.
Right.
So they pushed for it. This was probably week 2. So we would have 2 sessions a week. And there was only 4 weeks that we worked with him. So about week 2 is when he was talking, and he had already he'd gained full feeling all the way back up in his leg. He started moving his hand. Like I said, he started to talk a little bit. It was broken. You had to really pay attention to understand him, but his voice was coming out. So they went to do the swallow test, and his body had healed over the trach.
Uh-oh.
Yep.
That's impressive.
Yep. It was amazing. The doctor said they had never seen anything like it. And so, but still, not one time did a doctor ask us what we were doing. Not one time. And so it was very disheartening. By week 3, he was getting up and going to therapy. And that was just amazing to see him. No feeding tube, no trach, no tubes.
In the 3rd week. Wow.
3rd week. And by week 4, we actually took him out to lunch, and he walked into the restaurant with us. Yeah. And a year later, he was back at work and driving. So the power of light. The power of light.
That's remarkable. And of course, I shouldn't be shocked in that I am a huge believer in photopuncture or photonic acupuncture. I've seen so many miracles with it. I've never worked with a stroke patient, at least not to that level. I've worked with people 2 years after a stroke to help the family, to help them, to help with quality of life. And we've had some pretty remarkable things happen, but nothing to that extent. Nothing where we got in just as it had happened and saw that kind of remarkable recovery.
Yes. It was a miracle. Like for me, it was seeing a miracle because I had no idea what I had just started learning about it. So I really had no idea the capability of the body. And I say the capability of the body because we're stimulating the body to do what it's supposed to do.
Right. We're not healing anything. We're giving it the signals and the energy to go do what it needs to do.
Absolutely. And I saw it right before my eyes.
That's incredible. That's wonderful. So did the family ever get their own torches and start doing it themselves?
They did purchase a torch, and they worked with him a little bit, but then he just stopped.
He just went on and had his life.
Yeah. The only thing he did not get back full use of was his hand, but he still had use of it, but he
not the same dexterity.
Yes. And I believe had he kept doing it, it would have come back, but he didn't live near them.
Right.
And once he was able to move back down to his home, that's what he did. So.
Well, I can't imagine having an experience like that and then not having one in my back pocket for the rest of my life all the time, just in case. But that's, you and I don't go anywhere without some sort of torch in our purse, in our saddlebag, in whatever. And so, but everybody, if you think the tool is done and it's not your tool, then that's their choice to make.
Mm-hmm. And Kay, I'm sorry, I carry two torches with me, and all of my family members, including my kids, have their own.
Yeah, my great grandnephew, who's 9, was here weekend before last, and he has his own red torch. And we taught him, he'd been using it with his grandmother for the last few weeks to just doing health and balance points and then learning parasympathetic points because he has trouble sleeping. He's had kind of a rough home life. It hasn't always been stable. And so just being able to calm his brain and put himself to sleep, he's getting better reading scores, better comprehension. He's able to be calm. He doesn't get as triggered by his 6-year-old little sister. And the 6-year-old little sister has her own torch, but she wanted a blue one.
Right.
She really wanted blue light. And so her grandmother listened to that and made sure she had a blue one, which is really, really calming for her. And she needed that. So yeah, we're the same way. The whole family always has lights around. And I, of course, lights in pads and panels and torches. And if there's a way, I don't have an immersion bed. I don't think I'm going to go for the $120,000 immersion bed. I'd like to, but I think we'll wait. But the empowerment of having, like you and I know, we're going to prefer using 2 torches. And for anybody watching this, you don't have to have 2 torches. There's just more things you can do. You can go do 2 points at once. You can be doing bilateral stimulation and balancing both sides of the body at once, but it's not something you have to have. Don't feel you've got to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get started. You can get started for just, a little course and a torch for a couple $100, or you can, work with what tool is best for you. And
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I did start with 1 torch. The way I was able to use 2 is because the family did purchase one. So I was able to use theirs and mine. Then I went back to using 1 torch for a while. And then Dr. McLaren came out with a new torch. And so I purchased the new one, and then I purchased the new one. So we have 7 now.
We both have the drawer of dead soldiers. They probably would still work, but it's our museum. It's like having an old Apple, one of the original Apple computers on your desk or in the closet.
That's funny that you say that because my kids have my old torches. They have the McLaren torches, and they call them the OG, which is the old gangsta.
The old gangsta.
They call it the old gangsta torch.
The old
So,
gangsta torch.
it's
And
fun.
that's, a well-made, and that's one of the other differences about what's out there. A
Mhm.
well-made torch, McLaren really, he pioneered so much of photonic acupuncture, and he made a really durable tool that could be out of the barn, could be out of the weather, could be dropped. And the better made tools today are the same way. There's no plastic pieces that you're worried about breaking off. There's not going to get scratched. They're going to be able to be dropped. And the best ones use power equally till the battery is drained. They don't start off with high power and then get louder, dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, trying to save that battery. They use it. You're getting a consistent output. And not everything on the market. There's lots of $30, $40, $50 there. You could go get a 5 milliwatt laser pointer for a couple dollars, but you won't have that consistency of wavelength. You won't have that consistency of power output. So from a professional, putting it into professional use, people like you and I are going to want to have a tool that we know we're going to get a consistent output. We want to be able to do dosage or timing and know what we're getting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's the craziest, besides, that's pretty crazy, starting early on with a severe stroke, but what other crazy, wonderful stories have you had working with photonic acupuncture?
I work a lot with animals, excuse me. So the humans just kind of came along with their animal. And
That
so
happens.
it does. I got into the alpaca industry, and that was very interesting because I started working with alpacas that were having fertility problems. Not only fertility, but also having trouble holding their pregnancy. And yes, and this was back when alpacas were, $100,000, and and they were being imported in and things like that. And so I got to work a lot with fertility, and it was very interesting because it worked. It worked.
Really?
And yes, I even had one that she had been pregnant, I think 7 years. They were getting ready to retire her, so they sent her to my farm, and I worked with her. The first year, I stimulated her points all the way through the pregnancy. I worked with her every day. She held the pregnancy, and we had a baby.
Nice.
So what we found, the vet said, was she was losing her plug too soon, and that's why she was aborting. She was able to hold it. And then the second year, I did not work with her at all, and she held her pregnancy. So that's what I had to do to get her value back.
Right.
Or otherwise they think, well, you have to be doing this in order for her to hold her pregnancy, but I didn't.
Once the body had recovered, her body had recovered. That's great.
Her body completely recovered and was doing what it was supposed to do.
So this is a summit specifically about pain.
Yes.
And you've got kids. You've got active kids that play sports.
Yep.
Somebody gets hurt. What do you do?
We go straight for the light. We don't go for ice. What's that?
And do what with it?
We'll pull the book out if we need to. I like to have my kids work on themselves. I don't like them to depend on me because I'm not always there. And so I'll pull the book out and I'll guide them through, say it's knee pain, I'll guide them through the knee points. If it's a bruise, we work right on the bruise, or we stimulate the big toe to stop bleeding in the body. The other thing I did want to say, my son started a new job. He's 18. He has problems with his feet. He's 6'5", wears a size 15 shoe. So standing for him is a problem. And so he came home after his first day and he said, "Mom, my feet are killing me." And I said, "Well, here's the light. Here's the book. Look up feet." And he did it himself. And literally it's like 3 points to stimulate. By the time he was done, he stood up and he said, "My feet feel great, Mom." So it took the pain right away. I do have another story quick about migraines. I was at an alpaca show, and I had a time slot to do a little seminar about light therapy. And they put me in the lunchroom, and it happened to be at noon, at lunchtime, which was great. So I had a captive audience. I was disappointed because people weren't there just to hear it, but there were so many people that heard it. The gentleman sat down, and I was talking about things I had done and what it works on and how it works. And he said, I have a migraine. And I said, you do? And he said, I do. And it is really bad, one of the worst I've had. He said, I took the medication and it's not working. And so I brought my book over, and I opened my book to migraine, and I handed him my torch. And I walked him through our migraine points. And by the time it's 2, 4, 5 points, by the time he got to the 5th point, his migraine was gone. So what's that?
So that makes a believer.
And not just out of him. You know, there were all day long, people that were in the seminar all day long, they would go by his booth and how are you? And he's like, I'm perfectly fine. So I will have to say sales were pretty good that day.
Well, I'm going to just so we clarify for people watching this, you're referring to Dr. McLaren's book of points.
Correct.
Which is a little tougher to get these days. So
yes.
And you can correct me, any really good book of acupressure points will often work.
Yes.
Our company, Photonic Therapy Institute, sells charts of points, but there are also, there are points out there. You can also look up acupuncture recipes for migraine. You can activate any acupoint with light instead of a needle. So there's lots of ways to do this if you don't have Ronnie's great book of points to put in front of the kid or to put in front of the client. Don't feel you can't do this. Start with where the pain is. Like she said, if her kid had a bruise, you put the lights on the bruise. Start where the pain is, and then find the acupressure or acupuncture points or photopuncture. You can Google for photopuncture points for that particular issue. There's ones for sports recovery, for wrists, elbows, and I'll be talking more about photopuncture in another session as well.
Yes, and I refer to Dr. McLaren's book because that's been my Bible, if you will, for 20 years. And I am learning new things. You can't teach the dogs new tricks. I will say my son was a baseball pitcher, and we would use the torch on his elbow and his shoulder after he pitched instead of ice to bring down the inflammation from pitching as well. And so, yes. And I do have one more story about pain.
Go for it.
It is, you talk about crazy stories. I was working with some barrel racers, and they were having some fertility issues with their horses. They were breeders, and they bred thoroughbreds, and they were having some breeding issues, and they had a horse that was kind of rank, and we found out that she had an ovarian cyst by way of Dr. McLaren has an assessment that you can do on a horse, and the horse tells you where it hurts. Right. So we did that. Well, one of the barrel racers had a horrible back problem, so bad that the last time she rode, 3 men had to lift her off of her horse. She couldn't sit Indian style. She couldn't lay on her stomach. She was debilitated from the pain in her back and was facing back surgery. And so they asked me, what do you think? And I said, well, I never say no. So here we go. Let's go. And so I worked on her. And she sat up, she sat Indian style, she laid on the floor with her arms up under her chin. And she literally went home that day after one session and dug a stump out of the ground.
You got to love horse people. If a little is good, more is going to be better. Well, it doesn't hurt right now, so I'm going to go overdo it.
Right. Yeah. But she never had the pain again. But she did have deterioration in her back, and she purchased a torch and was able to put back surgery off I think 2 years. And then when she did have back surgery, she used the torch, and her doctor could not believe her recovery. He said he'd never seen recovery so fast.
We had very similar with my husband after a quadruple bypass.
Mm-hmm.
We had light on him as we, as soon as I could get into his ICU room, I had a torch in my pocket and we had light. And when he was released, the day after he was released, he had a brand new doctor that we went to go see and establish a relationship with. And we met this guy and he looked, he says, "When was your surgery?" And my husband said it was, last Tuesday. It was like 8 days before. And he says, no, your scar is at least 3 weeks old. And I said, well, no, we've been using light therapy on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, many doctors just haven't had the opportunity yet to learn about photobiomodulation or light therapy. And so he immediately went into, oh my God, you can't do that. It's not researched.
Right.
And my husband said, oh, dude, he's on morphine at this point, right? He's still in a lot of pain. He says, dude, you shouldn't have said that. And I looked at the doctor. I said, how many inches of research would you like? He says, what do you mean? I said, would you like an inch of papers, 2 inches of papers, 3 inches of papers? I have 5,000 studies for you. And he's like, oh.
Right.
But because, everybody, we all learn our own tools. It's not that the doctor was incapable. It's he had not been introduced to it yet. Mm-hmm. And by the time, my husband never had to go through all of the rehab, go to the exercise center and do all the walking on the machines. Right. He went in the very first time and they went, well, you already passed the ending tests. You don't have to do this, which was good because it's an hour drive one way to the rehab place for us. So that empowered him to not have to be, he just did his walking here and continued to rehab his heart here at home. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And, once you're made a believer, you're a believer. My kids, they'll sometimes try to go around me. We use it for my daughter's periods. She has horrible periods. And so we use it for the pain and to help lessen the flow. My husband even, he knows it works, but he doesn't want to ask me. And he wants to prove me wrong. And I'll never forget one time he had this horrible pain in his jaw, but he didn't tell me about it. And when I wasn't home, he would use my torch. And about 2 years later, he said, back around this time, I had this horrible pain in my jaw. And when you weren't home, I was using the torch. It took that pain right away. And I'm like, you're not going to prove me wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And now he's using it on his hand. He has one of my OG lights and he's using it on his hand. So, yeah.
Yeah. My usually craziest ones is when I'm on airplanes.
Right.
I will invariably get the seatmate who is either in a lot of pain, their head won't turn, or they're having they're having, some sort of allergy flare. And I was sitting next to a woman a couple of years ago. And she's sitting next to me, and about half an hour after we took off on a very long flight, she was obviously having problems breathing. Mm-hmm. Her eyes were running. Everything was swollen. She was starting to wheeze. And I just looked at her. I said, would you like some help with that? Because she's looking frantically, and she says, I forgot my inhaler. Mm-hmm. And she's going across country. She's going from Tucson to New York City. And, she's like, I forgot my inhaler. I said, well, let's see. And I just whipped out my torch and I showed her some allergy points on her hands and wrists. And of course she's like, but the problem's up here. I said, that's okay. You can put it here to help with the pain, but let's stop the allergic reaction first. And of course she never had to bother to get to her face. By the time she had activated a few points, she could breathe.
Right. Yeah.
I did not get to go home with my own torch, right? Of course, she kept it. She just like, nope, I'm going to buy that off you. But when you start figuring out how the body works and the triggers that you can give to the body to kick in the immune response or to lower, sometimes the immune response is too much. It's overreacting to something. So we're balancing that response. Instead of just triggering it, we're balancing it. Right. And we're not going into this severe histamine reaction to what might have been just a little allergen, but the liver overreacted. And yeah, so I have seatmates that they couldn't turn their neck. Oh, here, use this.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 minutes later, like, wait a minute, where'd that pain go?
Right.
So yeah, it's bringing pain down quick is the fastest way to make a believer of someone, but then they start seeing all the other benefits.
Right. I have a lot of experience in with athletes. And so I'll walk up to a sporting event and there are performance points that you can stimulate on an athlete to open their lungs, to give them focus, and to give them energy. And so my daughter plays beach volleyball. So she'll come off the court after, 3 sets, and, you can see there's a little bit of fatigue because they're in sand, and I'll just do her performance points, and she, perks right back up, and people will come over. What are you doing? What are you doing? And so, oh, well, I have pain here. Okay, sit down, and I'll just stimulate their points or stimulate right where the pain is, and they usually get up and the pain is gone. And so, and it sparks a lot of really great conversation because people don't know about it. People don't know what they don't know. The same with doctors, I feel. They don't know what they don't know, but they have to be open to it.
And it's growing so much. It really is. The very first graduate degree in photobiomodulation is going to be starting this year at a university in France, the big university in Paris. So even with all the medical research going on around the world, there haven't been degrees in photobiomodulation. That has not been a thing, and now it's coming. And of course, we know that just like with massage therapy or physical therapy, you don't have to have that postgraduate degree to use it, to get fabulous results by it. They may need it to understand it, and we're learning so much right now with the COVID-19 crisis. Research, now there's funding has opened up for research. Anything that shows that it might help with lung, reaction with the immune response, with triggering the immune response, the inflammatory response to fight it, to recover from it. All of those are things that photobiomodulation, which is not exactly the photonic acupuncture that you and I are talking about, although that can trigger some of it. But all of that research is now, they're knocking on the researchers' doors and saying, what have you got? What have you got? And between nitric oxide and photobiomodulation, this is going to explode. Desperate times fuel innovation.
Yes.
And I think one of the good things that'll come out of this will be that 5 years from now, the medical industry is going to be much more aware of this incredibly powerful tool that doesn't have all the negative side effects, that didn't take 10 years to make it through the FDA because you had to, plan on so many animals dying before you could study it on humans.
Right.
We already know it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's shortening up that FDA approval process. It's shortening up, emergency use approvals are going out like crazy right now.
Yes, that's awesome. That is really awesome. I did used to use it also on my mom who had neuropathy, and it worked really well on her neuropathy.
Yeah, neuropathy's been one of our biggest focuses for both typical light therapy and with photonic acupuncture. It both ways work, both complement each other. And that's one of the beautiful things about using photonic acupuncture. It can augment many other therapies, other modalities. Massage, you use PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic frequencies as well.
I do.
And I do a lot of stretch and release exercises, orthobiotomy work, that sort of thing. And they complement. There's no drug interactions. There's no negative reason not to add the light to it.
Right.
That's a beauty. Something you don't have to be going up and looking up and going, oh, am I going to hurt somebody with it?
Right.
No. Yeah.
And the thing I like about it too is I just recently started doing the PEMF. So you have restrictions on PEMF. So with light, I have no restrictions. I can work with anyone, whether even if they have a defibrillator. pacemaker, defibrillator, cochlear implant. So with the PEMF, you cannot do that.
Right.
So there's so many benefits to light therapy, and it has been my number one tool. And I'll just say I started PEMF 2 years ago, and I am using it less and less. I'm bringing my light back out.
And where do you plan? What do you hope for your business? Where do you plan to have things going from here?
My heart is to help people. My heart is to just really show people there is a better way. You don't have to be on all these drugs for pain, especially for pain. And, we have an opioid problem. And when we can show people that there's a better way, and we can get to these pain doctors, especially, and show them there's a better way,
right,
then I have completely fulfilled everything I've set out to do.
That's wonderful.
Yep.
Any other stories you want to share with us before we end up for today?
I've been sitting here trying to think of other things, and there's been so many over the 20 years. A lot of mine are with animals. Well,
we'll hear more from you for our animal summit in October. Definitely.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Good stories for that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ronnie. And we'll get this posted, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Kay. Bye-bye.